What's up everybody? Welcome back. If you're new here, my name is George, and today we're going to take a look at a mod that when I first heard about this type of thing, I didn't give it much thought because at the time I was doing most of my retro gaming on CRTs, and I still mostly do, but after making some videos and doing some light streaming, I decided I wanted an easier way to integrate my retro consoles into that. There are simpler options like just getting a converter, kind of like a RetroTink, but I kind of want to hold out for the RetroTink 4K, which isn't out yet when I'm recording this, and also it's gonna be expensive, so I wanted to kind of dip my toe in a little bit with something not so expensive. So I bought the 64 HD for an N64. I pre-ordered it when it was first coming out, and it just took me a while to get around to doing the project and to making this video. It's actually one of the more affordable ways to HDMI mod your N64. So I think that's enough of an intro. Let's get into what you need. Gamebox claims that this mod is compatible with all North American, Japanese, and PAL consoles with motherboard revision 1 through 9. We also need the tools to open the console up, which is going to be a GameBit driver, a number 0 Phillips head, and a number 2 Phillips head. We will have to solder for this mod, and you're going to need a small length of 30 or 32 gauge wire. The instructions specifically say not to use a larger or smaller gauge wire. In the kit, we've got the 64 HD board, the HDMI daughter board, a ribbon cable, a flex cable, 2 screws, a 3D printed shroud, and a 3D printed bracket. This mod utilizes a mini HDMI output, so you're going to need a mini to standard HDMI adapter or a mini to standard HDMI cable. First step is disassembling the console down to the motherboard, and that means taking out a bunch of screws, and some of them are different sizes. To keep track of them, I normally grab a cardboard box and draw a little diagram of the console and put the screws into that diagram as I take them out. With the motherboard exposed, Now I need to check which revision I have so I know where to solder the 30 gauge wire from the flex cable to the motherboard. It's located here behind the game slot, and it looks like I have revision 8, which means I need to solder to this via next to the PIF chip, closest to pin 15 instead of directly to pin 16 on the chip. Once I'm done soldering the flex cable in, I'm going to test the output of the mod to make sure everything's connected properly before final assembly. So now we're going to test our board. We pull this latch up so we can get our ribbon cable in. And we want the ribbon cable facing with the 64 HD font towards the middle of the board. Lock down the connector. We'll unlatch the lock on the other connector next to it. Grab our ribbon cable. And we're going to insert it with the blue tab facing up. Lock it down. Then we need our HDMI board. And this is going to be the same thing. Unlock the tabs, place it with the blue tab facing up, and lock it down. We'll plug our mini HDMI in, and the other end will plug into a monitor. And I also have it hooked up to an analog signal, which comes up immediately. And then after a couple seconds, our digital signal is reaching our monitor. We'll open the menu, make sure that the commands work, and everything seems to be working perfectly fine. Now that we know it works, we can move on to the rest of the install. So far, we've left the motherboard in the bottom half of the shell. This is just so it's easier to handle and not flopping around on the connector that's on the bottom of this expansion port right here. But now, we've got to put the HDMI board in, and it sits underneath the AV port. So we're going to have to take it out of the shell. Before we close up the console, there's one thing we should do. Plug everything in, open the menu and check your firmware. I'll put a link down in the description to get to the Gamebox GitHub. Now, this isn't something that everyone's going to want to do, but if you're like me, I ordered on the pre-order a long time ago, which meant my firmware wasn't up to date, and some of the features didn't work at all. Like 1080i just displayed the screen in the top half, and then the bottom was garbled rainbow. 240p kind of worked, kind of didn't. The audio was very staticky, kind of rough, but you want to check to see if you can update the firmware. This isn't like some other mods where you get a USB port or an SD card and you can update the firmware that way. This one's a little more complicated, but I promise it's not that hard. The directions just are kind of vague, and if you don't know exactly what you're doing, it can become very difficult. So that's why I'm here. I'm going to run through updating the firmware and everything you need to do to get set up. Now you do need to buy a couple things to do this. So this might not be for everyone, but if you want to get the most out of it, I recommend trying to update the firmware. First, we're on the GitHub page. Right here at the top in repositories, we're going to click there. And if you just want the latest official firmware release, you can come here, Gamebox Product Firmware Updates. Go to 64 HD, and the newest one is going to be this one at the bottom. It was last updated 2 months ago. It's version 2.0.2. Click here, download raw file, and here it is in our download folder. Let's go back to the main page and to the repositories. Now we're going to go to the update install scripts. So this is the README page. If you've never used GitHub before, the README page is where you're going to find most of the very important information. You've got to read it. I know you've never read a README file before on any software you've ever used. Just trust me, you're going to want to go here. So as you can see, software. We need a computer with Windows 10 or 11. We need Xilnix ISE lab tools. We need the firmware update, which we just downloaded. Then you need some hardware. The first thing you're going to need is the Xilnix Platform Cable Programmer. That is this guy right here. Now you can get this from Amazon or AliExpress. They've got links here to some. I got mine off Amazon. It's a little bit more expensive, but it does come a lot faster. And the one I got came with a bunch of adapters. I ended up using this one that is just a quick connector for some header pins, and then individual ones. And you'll see why in a little bit. We've got our programmer, and we've got the software we're going to need. So let's get started. Step 1 requires us to run this batch file right here. So we're going to download this. Comes up in our downloads folder. And it says run as admin. If you don't run it as admin, you're going to get errors and it's not going to work. So you come, step 1, right click, run as admin. You might get a pop-up depending on if you have security disabled or enabled. If you do, more info, run anyway. Now, I also get another security prompt down here. I'm not sure if you guys can see it when I click this, but you're just going to have to accept any of the security prompts that come up and say OK. You can see here, it's opened a command prompt. The following batch file adds 2 required environment variables to Windows to allow Xilnix ISE tools to run. This batch file needs to be run as admin or it will fail. Press any key to continue. If you see any errors or zeros, rerun the batch as an admin. Press any key. We see success, 1-1, and no zeros and no errors. So, press another key, and we're done with that. We'll go back to the main page, and let's go to step 2. So this is where we're going to download the lab tools. This is the software that was in the README file. Now, 2A, 2B, and 2C are kind of directions. They're not really files, they're just pictures for when you're installing. And this isn't necessarily a download, it's actually just a link. It's not a link you can click on, but if you highlight it, right click, you can open link in new tab. So it'll bring you to this page. If you don't already have a login, you'll have to make one, sign in, and it'll take you to a download page. So at the download center, you're going to have to fill out this page as well, scroll down, and hit download. Now that our download's complete, we can come over here. Now this is a compressed folder, we're going to have to extract it. Now you don't have to extract it anywhere special, you can just right click whatever extraction software you have, extract files. I'm just going to let it make a new folder right in my downloads folder, just so I don't have to move stuff around too much. Here's our new folder. Go into it, and we'll go back to this. So like I said, 2A, 2B, 2C, they're kind of just steps for installing the software. So if you click here, you can see it says X setup. So this is what we're going to have to run to set it up. Right here, xsetup.exe. Double click, we get a warning, press accept or yes, and our installer starts running. Now, don't click through this too fast, because here we've got install options. This is a spot where we're going to deviate a little bit from the directions we see here, because if we scroll through and accept all our terms and conditions, we'll see that they're all checked. And then in this step 2B, we see that these three have been unchecked. I am going to uncheck the acquire manage a license key and the enable web talk, but I'm not going to uncheck the install cable drivers. I'm not sure why it's unchecked here on the GitHub, but I was doing it that way and I could not get it to work. I would plug in my cable, do the rest of the steps of this install, and it would just say that it couldn't see my cable. I went on the Discord, got some help from a couple people, and one of them suggested leaving that box checked and letting the program install cable drivers by itself, as well as later on in the steps where we do it again. So leave that one checked. Hit next. This is another step, 2C. So install directory, leave the default. That means don't change anything on this page. If you've got another hard drive where you want to install it, you can, but it's going to make all the other steps a little bit more difficult, if they even work at all. Do not change where this file installs. If you want to move it after, I don't know how that's going to work. For this install, we're not moving it. And hit install. I'll speed up through this just because nobody wants to sit and watch a progress bar. Now we get a warning when it's running the driver install to disconnect all Xilnix platform cable USBs from the system. I don't have mine plugged in. Just make sure that you haven't plugged yours in already. Hit OK, and it'll keep going. On the complete page, there's this text box right here that says you need to set the variables for your environment, and you've got to run the settings 32 or 64 batch file. I believe the first batch file we ran in step 1 takes the place of this, but I go ahead and run it anyway. It didn't seem to negatively affect it, and it just takes a couple seconds, so we'll do it anyway. That file is going to be on our C drive. So if we come down here, here's our new folder where the program was installed on C, 14.7. Lab Tools, and here are those two settings batch files. Now, I believe they're just settings for a 32-bit system or a 64-bit system. So I'm only running the 64-bit system because that's what we're running on. Run as admin. Yes, and it ran through. It flashes a command prompt up really quick. I'm not sure if it's even actually running. Now that we've finished all of step 2, let's go to step 3. Fix Xilnix install. This is another one where I'm not sure that I'm able to do this correctly. I found a way to make it work, but I'm not sure that I did it the way they wanted. This whole page for step 3 is very vague. It just says fix Xilnix install. It's got a folder labeled NT inside of it. I believe this file is a library of some kind. We've got an NT64, seems to have the same file in it. And then we have this batch file right here. It doesn't say where to put it, where to run it, what to do with these two folders. So what I've been doing, and what seems to have worked, is I will go into this Lab Tools folder, and in here there's a bin. Now this comes up in a later step, which is how I found it. It's actually part of step 4. In step 4, this is supposed to be a link to install the cable drivers, but I guess that doesn't always work. So they gave you a path to follow to find it, to find the cable install exe, and tells you to run it as admin. As you can see, it's in Xilnix 14.7, Lab Tools, bin, NT64. So I saw that and thought that must be related to this NT64 folder right here, that it's maybe trying to tell me that that's the folder that this file belongs in. We'll download this. We'll come back to our downloads folder over here. So here's our portability. Now I didn't do one for the NT folder, just the NT64 folder. We went to C, Xilnix 14.7, Lab Tools, bin, NT64, and I'm just going to take that library and pop it right down into this folder. Go back to step 3. We'll download this batch file. Here it is in our downloads folder. I'm going to run as admin. It said fixing broken runtime files, but then nothing else. And it doesn't create a log, it doesn't do anything really that you can see. Maybe it's doing something in the background, I'm not sure. Now we'll go to step 4. Like I said, we're going to follow this to the install drivers. So we're Lab Tools, bin, NT64. And then we're going to look for install drivers.exe. And here it is, install drivers.exe. And once again, it says run as admin. Right click, run as admin, accept the warning. Here it tells you again, make sure that all your cables are disconnected. Our command prompt is popping up. It runs a couple things, and then auto closes. This step is also a little bit vague, but it's a little bit easier than step 3. For this one, the only thing you need to worry about is downloading this batch file, and you can leave it right here, and you're just going to run it straight from this downloads folder, and it's going to see the firmware file that we downloaded way at the beginning while we were in the README. Now before we do that, we've obviously got to connect our updater to the 64 HD, and we do that through some header pins, but we've got to solder those on. So let's go do that, and then we'll come back. So here we are at our console. Here's our 64 HD, and these pads right here are where we're going to be soldering some pins to. Now these are just some pins that came with a quick connector kit. You may have seen it in another video where I did an RGB mod on a TV, but these are just going to sit right here on these pins and we'll solder them down. We're going to add some flux. And we're just going to pre-tin one spot on the first row we're doing. And we're doing that so we can line up the pins the way we want them and then solder the other two in. So we've got our pad pre-tinned. We'll grab a row of pins. See if I can get you guys a better angle. It's going to be kind of rough. Add some flux. So these header pins are how we're going to connect our JTAG platform cable to the 64 HD. There you go. Our header pins are soldered in. Now, let's hook it up. So like I said, I'm using this cable adapter that just has the quick connector here and individual pins on the other side. These individual pins are what we're going to plug into the 64 HD, and this header connector is going to go into our Xilnix programmer. So we just plug this together. Now, on this, it's labeled V-reference on the right and TMS all the way to the left. So here we've got our red cable, and each one of these is individually labeled. The red one says V-reference, and that's all the way to the side. And then this last one says TMS, and that's all the way to this side. So we'll just line up the pins with those. Plug it in, and now we'll hook it to the 64. And the pin locations are labeled just like these. So we just got to match up the labels on here to the chart for SPI to JTAG. JTAG is what these are going to be labeled, and the SPI are the labels you're going to see on the 64 HD. They'll be labeled as TDO, TCK, TMS, V-reference, TDI, and then ground. And that leaves one pin that's not plugged into anything. Just put it off to the side so it's not touching anything in the console. We're going to go back to the computer and plug everything in. First, we'll plug the square end of this USB cable into the adapter or the programmer. The other end into a USB port on our PC. Now, your console needs to be powered on. So let's go ahead and power on the console. And there's a status light on the Xilnix programmer cable. That status light needs to be green, and that's showing that it's connected to the PC and it's connected to the 64 HD. And come back to our PC, and we've got our flash update batch file. This one doesn't say that it needs to be run as admin, so we're just going to double click, run anyway, and it pops up another command window. So here it will tell you what firmware we're updating to. It says flashing using firmware update 64HD v2.02.mcs. Firmware update about to begin. Leave the device powered on and plugged in until the process is complete. Press any key to continue. Let it run through. Now this may take a little bit of time, but it's not too long. Once the window closes, that's it. You're done. Firmware is up to date. Now, I'm just going to go and switch over to my HDMI in. I can see the signal from the 64 HD. I'll open the menu. And then we'll come down to the Info tab. Here we can see firmware revision v2.1.1. And that's it. You're up to date. Let's button up the console and move on to the features. Now that we've buttoned up our console, let's talk about how to get into the menu and change all our settings. To get in, you're going to be using the 64 controller. So it's going to move stuff around in the menus and whatever's on screen in the game. Don't worry, you just hit the reset and the options will stay, but the game will reset. You're going to hold the left and right shoulder buttons and press down on the D-pad and the down C button. You'll hold that button combination for a couple seconds and the menu will pop up. In the menu, we've got display settings, reset, save settings, and the info tab. Info tab is the firmware version. Save settings is once you change all your settings and you've got it set up where you want it to be every time you turn the console on, you'll hit save settings. You'll get the little prompt that settings are saved, and then you can back out of the menu, and if you turn the N64 off, it'll still be working the way you set it up. Reset is an option that's not going to work for me, and it's not something you necessarily need, so to activate it, you have to add an additional wire into the mod. This wasn't an option when I was originally installing the mod, so I didn't put the wire. I'm not going to be using it that much, so I didn't want to open the system back up just to put that one wire in. Then we've got our display settings. In display settings, we've got resolution, scaling, overscan, alternate audio sampling, the deblur, and Scanlines. So let's go through all these options. We'll start with resolution, and if we have to hit some of the other ones while we're doing it to explain some stuff, we will. The default resolution is going to be 720p, and this is by far the most compatible signal that the 64 HD puts out. It works on every TV I've tried it on, every monitor that has HDMI that I've used it on. It even works through a HDMI to component converter to my HD CRT that can process a 720p signal, and it works there as well. This is the default. This is where most people are going to use it. It's not technically the highest resolution that it can put out, but it's the highest standard resolution that it will put out. The next option, or the first option in the menu, is 240p. So let's switch it to that and see what it does to my capture card. And it does that. As you can see, it's stretched out, it's not centered, and the audio is really crackly. Now, on my capture card, the alternate audio sampling is another option that you can use in the 240p. Sometimes it'll clean up the audio, and on some CRTs it does when I'm using a HDMI to component converter. But here it doesn't fix it. It's still really staticky no matter what I set it to. This resolution is more intended for use with an HDMI to component converter, as I've mentioned before a little bit. And you would then hook that component signal into a PVM or even a consumer CRT that has component inputs. And you would kind of be hacking a RGB mod into your N64. If you haven't already done an RGB mod to your N64, this is a nice extra feature that you get if you do occasionally game on CRTs. Some of the resolutions work better, not through my capture card. My capture card does mess up some of them, so let's see what the 240p looks like directly. I'll capture it with a camera just on the screen, and it looks like this. Not much better. The 240p, the monitor really doesn't understand what it is. It doesn't even assign it a resolution on the info screen. It just tells me the frequencies that it's running at. It's not going to work on most modern TVs. It's really only designed to be sent through the HDMI to component converter and then to a CRT. The next resolution is 480p. Now this doesn't work through my scaler, but directly on HDMI to my monitor. Here's what we get. Unlike my capture card. Another use for this mode is a PC CRT. I was actually able to get this to run through an HDMI to VGA converter and then send that to a PC CRT that I have. And you can use it in the 480p mode. You can use it in one of the later modes we'll talk about, but in 480p, here's what it looks like on a computer CRT. That's the best I can do for capturing a CRT. It's difficult. I haven't quite perfected it with my standard recording camera, and I started using this older camcorder, and it seems to do a slightly better job than my standard camera, but it's still not perfect. So look forward to that in later videos. Maybe I'll get better at it. Then we've got the 720p. That's the mode that almost everybody's going to be using. Then we've got our 1080i mode. Now, once again, I'll select 1080i. My capture card doesn't like it. It doesn't recognize it. It doesn't know what to do with it. So it just blacks it out. Directly to my monitor, we get this. So the monitor actually recognizes it as a 1080i signal. So it works and it displays. It's technically lower resolution than  I could see using this on a HD CRT, but for some reason the two converters I have won't convert the 1080i signal. It doesn't see it properly coming from the 64 HD, so it can't get to my HD CRT. I might revisit it if I find a different converter, but for now, unfortunately, there's not much use to this mode. I guess you could play it and stretch it out, but I'm not sure that it's for everyone. It's kind of a niche use, but it's there. Our next resolution is one that actually is a higher resolution than the 720p. It's just not a standard resolution, so not every TV is going to work. This resolution is 1280 by 800, and it's most commonly used in tablets and some laptops. I could see this being useful for someone who maybe made a custom display for something like a Mister, and they used a tablet or an iPad screen. This might work for you. Another way to use this would be if you're really fancy and you have a widescreen PC CRT that uses VGA. You could send it to that through a VGA converter, and you would have a 16 by 9, it's actually technically 16 by 10 image, but with a PC CRT you could adjust the height and width to get it to the right size. And then the last one is 1024 by 768. This one is almost a 4:3 resolution. It's technically a little bit wider. It is 5.32 by 3. You ever say something wrong about 15-20 minutes into recording something and not realize it until the next day when you're looking at the footage again at 3 o'clock in the morning? It is 4:3. It is not almost 4:3. It is not a little bit wider. It is a 4:3 resolution. I'm bad at math, and I'm bad at calculating things. Go back to the video knowing that I was very tired and that the resolution I'm talking about is in fact a perfect 4:3 resolution. Thanks. This is another resolution that would be good for a 4:3 PC CRT. This is what it looks like. It looks pretty good. It's sharper than the 480p signal, and I think if I was going to be playing on PC CRTs a lot, this is the mode I would use. There were some concerns about the heat generated using these last two resolutions. The final verdict was that you don't need to put a heatsink on the chip if you're going to be using these resolutions. But it's not too expensive, and if you're going to be using them a lot, you could get a small heatsink and stick it on top. I didn't because I'm probably not going to be using these resolutions too much. But officially from Gamebox, you do not need a heatsink to use those last two resolutions. So we'll go back, set it to 720p, and we'll talk about the rest of our options. The next one is scaling. So we've got proper, stretch, and TV. Proper is an integer scale. That means that everything is perfectly upscaled, square pixels, it's exactly the right size, there's no zoom on it. That's just, it's packaged your 240p signal into a 720p box. The stretch blows the image out to a 16 by 9 image. Everything gets stretched, nothing's the right size. This is good for some N64 games that actually support anamorphic widescreen. Now, what is anamorphic widescreen? What does that mean? Anamorphic widescreen is something that was available on Donkey Kong 64 and a couple other games. We're on the options page, and you can see that we've still got it in proper scale, and we have it in the standard mode, the normal aspect ratio for the game. You can see the tops of the barrels that aren't selected are round, the barrel that Donkey Kong's holding is the right width, and Donkey Kong himself doesn't look squished. If we go into our options, first option is screen size, and it's set to normal. We'll set it to widescreen, hit B, and now it looks funny. Donkey Kong looks squished, the barrel looks like he crushed it, and you'll notice that the unselected ones, the sprites, because those aren't 3D rendered objects, they look normal still. The way it works is sprites are still going to be normal, but anything that's 3D is going to be squished. And the way it was resolved on a CRT back in the day was some CRTs had a widescreen mode where it would take your 4:3 signal and squish it so it was 16:9. What that would effectively do is make something like this that looks like it's been squished horizontally. This would still be displaying on the full screen on a CRT. You would squash it down from top to bottom and everything would be back into proportion. The barrel would be the right size, Donkey Kong would be the right size. On the 64 HD, we get to do it a little bit differently. Instead of squishing him down vertically, we're going to stretch it back out horizontally. And we're going to use the scaling mode to do that. So we open our menu, hit display settings, and we're going to switch it to stretch. Press B, and look at that. Donkey Kong is the right size, the barrel's the right size, everything looks good. Now this won't work for all widescreen 64 games because some of them use what's called letterbox widescreen, something like Jet Force Gemini. So here we are on the option menu for Jet Force Gemini, and you can see that we've still got the 64 HD in stretch, but we have the widescreen mode for Jet Force Gemini turned off. If we turn it on, you can see it doesn't look right. We've got a gap on the top and on the bottom. And the reason for that is that Jet Force Gemini, when you would set it in widescreen on a CRT, you didn't set the CRT to widescreen mode. You would leave it in the standard 4:3 mode, and the game would just letterbox itself, but it would display the image correctly. So if we go back to our display settings, and we put it to proper, and go into our options, we can see that now it looks correct, but it's set to widescreen. It's just shorter than it used to be. So that's the widescreen off on proper scale and the widescreen on proper scale. It looks a little funny on the option screen, but in game it's going to be displaying everything correctly as widescreen. So all the 3D models, all that stuff is going to be correct. Now of course, nothing is stopping you from using the stretch mode on a 240p game like this. I'm not going to judge you, but most people probably aren't going to play it this way. This is kind of like a weird way to play. I guess if you've ever had a Game Boy Advance and you played Game Boy games on it and you used to stretch the screen out there and you got used to that, I suppose you might get used to this if this is the first time you've played a 64 and this is how you want to play it. By all means, I won't stop you. The next scaling mode is TV. Now this isn't an integer scale mode like the first one. This is taking our integer scale mode and zooming it by 1.5. So it's not quite 2 times zoom on that, because that would again be an integer scale. This is 1.5, so it's getting more of the vertical real estate on your screen without stretching it to 16:9 and without causing too much shimmering or screen tearing. I haven't noticed any in any of the games that I've played, but I haven't played all of my library yet, and my library is not the full library for the N64, so I have no idea which games would or wouldn't tear in this mode. You would just have to decide on your own if you want to play in TV mode or in the proper scale integer mode. The next option is Overscan, And this only affects the signal when you're using one of the scaling modes like stretch or TV. Gamebox says this is for older monitor compatibility and also for screens that had large bezels. I've never run into that on any of the screens that I have, and I've got some pretty old HDMI screens, but it's there in case you need it. If you've got stuff that's cut off on the top or bottom, it'll work for you. Alternate audio sampling is something for the 240p mode. When you're going through the converter, sometimes the converters don't treat the audio signal through HDMI the way it should be, and you can turn this on and it might fix it for you. It didn't work through our direct to the monitor HDMI, but through a converter it has changed it, and sometimes it'll clean up the audio a little bit. So our next option is the VI deblur. So the whole time I've been showing you captured footage or anything off screen, I've been doing it with the deblur option off. So this is the standard blurry image that the 64 used to put out. If you turn this option on, everything gets a little bit sharper. What it used to do is it would blur the pixels together on the 64. This deblurs them just a little bit, so everything, all of your pixels are perfectly square. Depending on the game, this can look better or worse. Or it might not even depend on the game. It might just depend on you. Maybe you like it super sharp pixels. The 64 games still have some software blur built into them, so polygons will have hard edges, but they won't be as hard as something like a PlayStation 1. Here they're still going to have a little bit of blur even with the deblur turned on, but it's definitely a lot sharper than it used to be. So I'll turn it off and turn it back on. And you get those perfectly square pixels. I'll probably swap back and forth between playing with it on and off depending on the game. The last option we have is Scanlines. And these are kind of controversial depending on who you ask. Through YouTube and through my capture card, the Scanlines are going to look horrible. I'm going to show it to you anyway, but trust me, it's not pretty. There's a couple levels. There's level 1, level 2, and level 3. In my opinion, the third one, that's way too big. You're losing a lot of information that you would have originally seen on a Nintendo 64 when it was originally displaying. The second one, it's still not great when you're looking at it in person. The lowest scanline mode, I think it looks good when you have it directly to a monitor. If you're looking at it through YouTube and through a capture card, it doesn't look good. The compression just screws all of it up and it doesn't look right. So for the rest of the video, I'm going to turn it off. Just know, if you do this mod and you look at the scan lines, test it out on a per game basis and how you feel about it. It's more of a personal preference. And as far as our menu, that's it. That's all the options we've got. Now, it's not a lot of options, but it's plenty to get you by for the cost of this mod. It's not as expensive as some of the other HDMI mods, and it's a lot easier to get a hold of. There's one feature I wanted to expand on before we moved on, and that's the 240p mode. Like I said earlier, to use this, you plug your HDMI cable into a HDMI to component converter, and then plug that component signal into a PVM or consumer CRT that has component inputs. I have two pass-through converters that work with this mode. Pass-through means that they don't scale the image in any way. If you put 240p in, you get 240p out. I bought both of the converters off of Amazon, but instead of putting links to the listings that I purchased from in the description below, those can go out of stock, or they might even change vendors altogether. I'm going to recommend you go to retrorgb.com/support.html. There, you can scroll down to a link called Amazon Products Bob's Tested. There, you can find zero lag converters for HDMI to component. Now, it's not a guarantee that it will work, but both of the ones that I purchased from that list worked with this mode. To highlight this mode, I decided to get some shots comparing the converted HDMI footage to a direct analog RGB output from a 64. Now the image isn't going to look as good as it does in person because I'm shooting it off of a CRT, but I used the same setup for both consoles and left the camera focused the same in the same position with all the same settings. I'm using the Sony CRT that I RGB modded in a previous video, and one console has a Voltar RGB mod in it, and the other one is our 64 HD. I have it set to 240p mode, and I have the deblur option turned off, because when I turned it on originally, I got some artifacts, and I figured that's not fair for the comparison if I'm adding on an extra option that's causing issues. So I just turned that mode off and did my comparison shots. Even though this wasn't the original reason I did the mod, it's kind of nice to get a 2-for-1 deal on an HDMI output and then also get a almost RGB signal as well. And that about wraps up this video. I think this is a good first time HDMI mod. It's on the cheaper side as far as HDMI mods go, and the added benefit of the 240p mode is nice. However, soldering the ribbon cable on isn't exactly beginner friendly. Updating the firmware takes a lot of knowledge and a lot of setup. And then if you want to reflash it again, you're going to have to open the console back up. So don't leave that off your pros and cons list. But if you've made it this far in the video, I want to thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. Maybe I helped you set up your 64 HD. I'll see you next time.
Corneria, fourth planet of the Lilat system. The evil Andros turned this once thriving system into a wasteland of near extinction. General Pepper of the Cornerian army was successful in exiling this maniacal scientist to the barren, deserted planet Venom. 5 years later, General Pepper noticed strange activity coming from Venom. James McLeod, Pigma Dangar, and Peppy Hare of the StarFox team were sent to investigate. Upon their arrival, Pigma betrayed the team, and James and Peppy were captured by Andros. Peppy barely escaped Venom and returned home to tell James' son, Fox, about his father's fate. A few years have passed. Andros has again invaded the Lilat system. General Pepper has turned to a new StarFox team headed by Fox McCloud to save Corneria and free the Lilat system once again.
It's about time you showed up, Fox. You're the only hope for our world.
I'll do my best. Andros won't have his way with me.
Good luck.
Open the wings. Check your G-diffuser system.
Falco here. I'm fine.
This is Peppy. All systems go.
Flippy here. I'm okay.
I see him up ahead. Let's rock and roll. Get back here! Slippy, watch out! Bogey on your tail!
Whoa! Help me! Thanks, Fox. I thought they had me.
We're entering Corneria City now.
This is horrible.
Everybody stay alert! You've got an enemy on your tail! Use the brake! I'll take this one. Get the one behind me. Something's wrong with the G-diffuser. I guess I should be thankful. Do a barrel roll. Pretty smooth flying, Fox. Try a somersault!
Enemy robot, dead ahead.
Let's go! All range mode. Ah, so this is StarFox. I'm going to crush you!
Enemy shield analyzed.
Those who cross Andros will die! No! Aim for his back! Try a U-turn! Try a U-turn!
Flippy's hit!
You annoying little flies! My Emperor! I failed you! We're heading out. All aircraft report.
You did it! I was worried for a moment.
You're becoming more like your father. I'm fine. You okay over there, Fox?
Impressive, StarFox. Now watch out for enemies in the asteroid field.
I won't let you down, sir.
Good luck.
Things are starting to heat up.
Quit dinking around, Flip. We're heading into the asteroid. Hey, Einstein, I'm on your side. It's quiet. Too quiet. Be careful, it's a trap! Use bomb quietly! Try a somersault!
Here comes a big one. Whoa! Can you make it?
Use the brake! Use the boost to get through! Incoming missile!
Location confirmed. Sending supplies.
I'm getting careless. Thanks, Fox. The enemy's coming from behind. Do a barrel roll. I guess it's your turn to be thanked.
You want a piece of me? Take that! Hold A to charge your laser.
You can also lock onto enemies this way. Never give up. Trust your instincts. Just shoot it, Fox. I cannot allow you to go any further.
Enemy shield analyzed.
Let's see what you've got. That shield's absorbing the laser. Good going, Fox. You're more cunning. I've underestimated you. How about this? I'm no match for you. I admit defeat. Are you gonna listen to that monkey? You're not as stupid as you look! I can't believe I lost to this scum!
Sorry to jet, but I'm in a hurry.
All aircraft report.
I'm fine, I'm fine.
I've taken a few hits, but I'm okay. You worry about your own hide.